Why won't she smile anymore? I've given her everything. Everything. She said it standing in the doorway of her daughter's bedroom, voice low and steady in the way of someone who has taught themselves not to break in front of others. The room was full of beautiful things, a canopy bed with soft white lights, shelves of carefully chosen toys, a window seat with velvet cushions overlooking a garden that was, even in December, maintained to a kind of perfection. And in the middle of all that careful beauty, a small girl sat cross-legged on the floor beside the window, holding nothing, saying nothing, watching the snow fall outside with eyes that were open but somehow very far away. Her name was Isla. She was 4 years old, and she had not smiled, not truly, not the way children smile when something reaches them, in 11 months. Her mother, Vivian Hargrove, was 32 years old, founder and CEO of Hargrove Interiors Group, a commercial design firm with offices in 4 cities and a reputation built on precision, taste, and an absolute refusal to leave anything unresolved. She was the kind of woman who solved problems. She identified what was broken, applied the correct resource, and restored function. That was what she did. It was what she was good at. But Isla would not be solved, and that terrified Vivian in a way that no quarterly loss report, no failed contract, no boardroom confrontation ever had. 11 months ago, Vivian's husband, Captain Theron Hargrove, a decorated officer with the kind of steady warmth that filled rooms without trying, had died in the line of duty during a training operation gone wrong. He was 34. He had been Isla's whole world in the way that fathers sometimes are to daughters, not just loved, but foundational, the kind of presence whose absence doesn't just leave a gap, but restructures everything around it. Isla had stopped talking much after that. She ate, she slept, she let herself be dressed and bathed and carried. But the light behind her eyes had gone somewhere Vivienne couldn't reach, and every attempt, every specialist, every therapy session, every carefully chosen experience had returned her to the same place. A small girl sitting quietly by a window, watching the outside world as though separated from it by more than glass.
Vivian's grandmother, Opal Hargrove, who lived with them in the large stone house on Clover Hill, had watched all of this with the patient sorrow of someone who understood grief's particular arithmetic. Opal was 78 years old, white-haired and unhurried, with the kind of presence that rooms grew quieter around in a good way. She watched Vivian try and try and try, and she said very little because she knew that some things could not be hurried. One morning in early December, Opal said simply over breakfast, "Take her to the winter market on Alderman Street this Saturday, not for a reason, just to walk." Vivian looked up from her laptop. "She doesn't respond to—" "I know," Opal said gently. "Go anyway." Alderman Street on a December Saturday was the kind of scene that existed in the specific register of small city winters. Strings of amber lights between the lampposts, the smell of roasted nuts and pine, vendors in wool coats behind tables of handmade things, children moving through it all with the particular bright-eyed energy of people whose nervous systems haven't yet learned to be guarded. Vivian walked with Isla's hand in hers, the little girl moving obediently beside her, looking at things without reaching for them. Vivian watched her face with the careful, continuous attention of a mother who has learned to read the smallest signals, a slight tilt of the head, a slowing of the step, the way Isla's grip on her hand sometimes changed texture without warning. They had been walking for 20 minutes when Isla stopped. Not abruptly, just stopped. Her small feet stilled on the cobblestone, and she stood looking at a table set slightly apart from the main row of vendors, beneath a canvas canopy the color of old cream. On the table, arranged without particular fanfare, were snow globes, dozens of them, different sizes, different scenes inside, some with small houses, some with figures, some with nothing but drifting snow and a single bare tree. Each one handmade, the glass slightly imperfect in the way that hand-blown things are, which made them more beautiful rather than less. The man behind the table was watching Isla the way he watched all children who stopped, quietly, without pressure, the way you watch a bird that has landed somewhere nearby and might leave if you move too quickly. His name was Forrest Kane. He was 31 years old. He had a bachelor's degree in fine arts from a state university, a small understanding of materials and light, and the particular patience required to work with glass, and a life that had narrowed through a series of events both chosen and unchosen to a small rented workspace behind his mother's house in the east quarter of town, where he made snow globes by hand and sold them at markets and small shops for prices that covered materials and very little else. He was not unhappy. That was the thing about Forrest Kane that people who passed his table too quickly never understood. He was not a sad man performing contentment. He was genuinely at peace with small things, because small things, in his experience, where most of the actual beauty lived. His father, a quiet carpenter named Douglas Kane, had died 6 years ago and left Forrest with a set of hand tools and the understanding that work done with care was its own kind of dignity, regardless of what it paid. His mother, Betty, was 61, gentle and sharp-eyed, who sold her own knitted goods 2 tables down at the same market, and who occasionally brought Forrest hot soup in a thermos and pretended she'd made too much.
Forrest had loved someone once, in his early 20s, a woman named Selena, bright and searching, who had been with him through his final year of university and a difficult, uncertain year after, when it became clear that the life Forrest was building would be made by hand and sell for modest prices. Selena had not left cruelly. She had left honestly, which was almost worse. She'd said she needed more stability than he could offer, that she respected him but couldn't build a future on respect alone. He had understood. He had not stopped caring about the work. He had simply continued. Ela stood before the table and looked at a snow globe in the second row, medium-sized, with a small winter landscape inside, a pine tree and a wooden bench dusted in white, and a single tiny figure sitting on the bench, face turned upward as if watching for something. She didn't reach for it, she just looked. Forrest watched her for a moment. Then he lifted the globe carefully from its position, turned it gently in his hands, and set it on the front edge of the table, closer to her, at her eye level, without saying anything. The snow inside shifted and settled. Ela watched it. Forrest crouched down slowly, unhurried, so that he was level with her. He picked up the globe and turned it over once, letting the snow rise in a soft, slow cloud, and set it back down. "The little person on the bench," he said quietly, conversationally, as though he were simply thinking out loud, "is waiting for the snow to say something. Snow doesn't talk, of course, but if you watch it long enough, it does something almost like talking." Ela's eyes moved to the globe. The snow was still drifting, unhurried, past the tiny bench, past the tiny figure, settling like a whisper. Vivian stood back, barely breathing. She had learned after 11 months that the worst thing she could do in moments like this was intervene. Forrest sat back on his heels and let the silence be. He didn't perform patience, he simply was patient, the way he was patient with the glass when it was being difficult, the way he was patient with the small wire figures he shaped with needle-nose pliers by the window in the mornings, because rushing them never made them better. After a long moment, Ela reached out one finger and touched the glass. It was such a small thing, the tip of a 4-year-old's index finger resting against the cool curve of a handmade snow globe on a cold December morning, but Vivian felt it in her chest like something shifting that had been locked for a very long time. Forrest looked at the globe, then at the child, then, with the particular attentiveness of someone who has spent years watching things, he looked at her face, at the quality of her stillness, at the way she held herself, at the careful distance in her eyes that wasn't shyness, but something older and heavier than shyness had any right to be in a 4-year-old. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he stood slowly and said to Vivian, quietly enough that it felt private, "Would you mind waiting just a few minutes? I'd like to do something small." Vivian looked at him. "What kind of something?" He reached beneath the table and brought out a small wooden box, the kind he used for repairs and modifications, fitted out with tiny tools and materials. "This globe has a loose figure inside. I've been meaning to reseat it. I'd like to also add something." He paused. "Just a small detail, if that's all right." Vivian looked at Isla, who was still watching the globe with that focused, quiet attention. "All right," she said. Forrest worked at the small table beside his display, and Vivian watched him with the particular attention she gave to people who were skilled at things with their hands. The way he opened the globe base with a tool no bigger than a pen, the way he handled the tiny wire figure with 2 fingers, and a steadiness that seemed disproportionate to the size of what he was working with. He added something to the interior, she couldn't see exactly what, and then resealed it, dried it, tested the seal, and turned it over once to watch the snow move. He set it on the table and turned it so that Isla could see. Inside now, beside the bench where the small figure sat, there was a second tiny figure, smaller, child-sized, seated beside the first. 2 figures on the bench together, snow drifting over both of them. Isla leaned forward slightly, and then, so slowly that Vivian almost missed it, the corners of her daughter's mouth moved. Not a full smile, a beginning of one, a softening, the way ice softens in the first warmth of a changed season, not melting all at once, but yielding at the edges to something gentler. Vivian's breath caught. She reached into her bag. "How much?" she said, and her voice came out less steady than she intended. "Please tell me how much." Forrest looked at Isla, who was still watching the snow inside the globe, her finger resting lightly against the glass. He looked at the expression on the child's face, that fragile, beginning softness, and then he looked at Vivian and said quietly, simply, with complete sincerity, "No fee, ma'am." Snowflakes danced her smile back. Vivian stood very still. In 11 months, she had paid for every kind of help that money could access. Specialists and therapists and curated experiences and beautiful rooms full of carefully chosen things. And a man at a winter market with a wooden repair kit and a needle-nosed pliers and a piece of wire no longer than her thumbnail had done something none of it had done. She pressed her lips together. She nodded once. "Thank you," she said, and the 2 words carried considerably more than 2 words usually carry. She came back the following Saturday, not because she'd planned to, or at least that was what she told herself. She brought Isla, who carried the snow globe in both hands, the way children carry things they have decided matter, and she walked directly to Forrest's table as though the rest of the market didn't exist. Forrest looked up from a globe he was assembling and saw them coming and felt something simple and uncomplicated. The particular satisfaction of seeing that a thing you made has found the person it was for. Isla set the globe carefully on the table and looked at Forrest with the full, direct attention that small children give to people they have decided to trust. She pointed at the 2 figures on the bench inside the globe. "Who are they?" she asked. Her voice was small and a little rusty from underuse, but it was there. It was present. Forrest considered this with appropriate seriousness. "I think," he said slowly, "they're 2 people who found each other on a cold day and decided to sit for a while instead of walking past.
Isla thought about this. Then she nodded, as though it confirmed something she had already privately concluded. Vivian, standing slightly behind her daughter, looked at Forrest over the child's head, and something in her expression, something she was not entirely in control of, said more than she would have chosen to say out loud. What happened next happened gradually, over weeks, in the unhurried way that real things developed. Vivian came back to the market. She began arriving earlier, staying longer, finding reasons, a gift for a colleague, something for Opal, a question about the glass-blowing process, that were real reasons, but also, if she was honest with herself, not the only reasons. She and Forrest talked, carefully initially. She was a woman who had learned to keep her inner life private, and he was a man who understood privacy because he valued it himself. But the conversations lengthened. She told him one Saturday over paper cups of mulled cider from the stall 2 rows over about Theron. Not the whole story at once, but pieces of it, set down carefully between other sentences, like objects being unwrapped. He listened the way he worked, with complete, unhurried attention. He didn't offer resolution or reframing. He simply received what she said and held it with care. She found that she was grateful for that in a way she hadn't expected to be. She was surrounded by people who wanted to help by fixing, by offering frameworks, by suggesting next steps, by gently redirecting her toward acceptance and forward motion. Forrest just listened. And sometimes listening was the only architecture a grief actually needed. He told her one afternoon when the market had thinned and the light was going gold between the lampposts about Selena, briefly, without self-pity, just the outline of it, how it had taken him a long time to understand that the end of that relationship hadn't been a verdict on his worth. How he'd arrived, slowly, at a life that was small in terms of square footage and financial margin, but genuinely his. "You don't seem like someone who resents it," she said, looking at him carefully. "I don't," he said, simply. "I make things that make people feel something. That's what my father did with wood. I do it with glass and wire and snow." He paused. "I think that's enough. I think it's actually quite a lot."
She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, almost to herself, Theron used to say something like that the size of a thing wasn't what gave it value. She didn't say anything else for a while. Neither did he. And the silence was, somehow, one of the most comfortable she had sat in since her husband died. Opal noticed a change before Vivian acknowledged it. The older woman watched her granddaughter come home from the Saturday market with a quieter face. Not sad quiet, but the other kind. The kind that follows an afternoon that has given something back instead of taking something away. She watched Isla carry her snow globe through the house and set it on the windowsill of her bedroom and stand looking at it with the same focused attention she gave it every day, but with something added now, a forward lean and aliveness in the shoulders. One evening, Opal found Isla in the kitchen with her snow globe on the table, turning it over and watching the flakes drift past the 2 small figures on the bench. "Grandma Opal," Isla said after a long, quiet moment, "can snow hear you if you talk to it?" Opal considered this seriously. "I think snow is very good at listening," she said. Isla nodded. She turned the globe over once more and watched the flakes drift past the 2 small figures on the bench. "I told the snow about Daddy," she said simply. "I told it he was warm." Opal pressed her hand over her mouth for just a moment. Then she put her arm around her great-granddaughter and held her, gently, in the way you hold something you are grateful to still have. In January, Vivian made a call. She had been thinking about it carefully for 2 weeks, not impulsively, not as a grand gesture, but in the measured, deliberate way she approached decisions that mattered. She called Forrest on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if he had 20 minutes to discuss something professional. He said yes. She had an idea. Her firm was expanding its residential design portfolio, a new line focused on handcrafted, artisan home objects, an area she'd been approached about by 3 separate retail partners in the past year and had never had the right foundational product for. She was proposing a collaboration, a curated line of custom snow globes designed in partnership with Hargrove Interiors, handmade by Forrest, sold through a dedicated channel with proper production support, fair compensation, and his name on every piece. She was clear. This was a business proposal. She was not offering charity. She was identifying a product gap and a craftsman whose work filled it, and proposing terms that reflected both realities accurately. Forrest was quiet for a moment after she finished. "Can I think about it for a few days?" he asked. "Of course. And can I show you something first, before I decide?" She came to his workshop that Thursday, a small, clean space behind his mother's house, with a workbench along one wall, and finished globes on shelves, and the smell of adhesive and pine, and something warm that turned out to be soup on the stove, because Bet had made too much again. He showed her his process, not as a pitch, just as it was. The wire forms, the glass work, the careful layering of each interior scene. The way each one started from a question. What does this person need to feel? Vivian stood in that small room for a long time, looking at the shelves of finished globes, each one slightly different, each one made with the particular attention of someone who believed the work mattered. She thought about Isla on the bench by the window, 11 months of quiet and distance. She thought about one cold Saturday morning and a man who crouched down and let the snow do the talking. She thought about 2 wire figures on a bench, side by side in the falling white. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think we should do this." The collaboration launched in March. The line was called simply Kane, Forrest's name, his alone, on a card inside each piece. The first run sold out in 11 days. The second run had a wait list. Forrest hired 2 part-time assistants. He expanded his workspace. He continued going to the Saturday market because he had started there and the market was part of who he was. Bet Kane, watching her son from 2 tables down, did not say anything for 3 weeks. Then one Saturday she came over during a slow hour and handed him a thermos and said, quietly and without drama, "Your father would have been very pleased." And then she went back to her table. Forrest held the thermos for a long moment. The winter light came down between the lampposts, amber and clean, and somewhere behind him he could hear a child laughing at something. A real laugh, unrestrained, the kind that costs nothing and means everything. He turned and looked. It was Isla, standing at his table with Vivian beside her, holding a new globe he'd left out that morning, one with 3 figures on a bench now, a small addition she'd asked for 2 weeks ago in the serious, specific way that 4-year-olds ask for the things that matter to them. 3 figures. She hadn't explained why. She didn't need to. She looked up at him with those eyes that over the past months had slowly, quietly, bravely come back to life, and she held the globe up and said, "Forrest, the snow is doing the talking again." He crouched down to her level. "What's it saying?" he asked. She looked at the drifting white inside the glass, the 3 small figures on the bench, the pine tree with its patient branches. "It says they're okay," she said. "It says everybody on the bench is okay." Vivian looked at the top of her daughter's head, at the small face turned toward the light inside the glass, and felt something settle in her, deep and permanent, like snow finally coming to rest after a long, long fall. "Yeah," she said softly, to no one in particular and to everyone. "Yeah, they are." He didn't cure a child's grief. He didn't transform a life overnight. He simply crouched down to her level, let the snow do the talking, and refused to charge for something that had come from the heart. And somehow, in the way that genuine kindness has of moving through the world in circles we can't fully trace, that was exactly enough.
What we make with love reaches places that power and wealth cannot. And sometimes the smallest globe in the smallest hands holds the biggest kind of warmth. Snowflakes danced her smile back, and that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories of hope, kindness, and love to everyone. Comment below to share your thoughts and be part of spreading positivity in the world.